Welcome back to Slothcast and Happy New Year. This is our first episode of 2022. I hope everybody's doing all right. Welcome new listeners and old. Today is a very special episode. This is one of our series called Limited Hangout, and we are with the author Wayne Curtis, and we're going to be talking about his book and about rum. His book is titled "And a Bottle of Rum: A History of the New World in 10 Cocktails." How are you today, Wayne?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Thanks. Thanks for asking. With us, as always, is our co-hosts with the most, Trevor Beveridge. Mr. Trevor Beveridge, how are you?
Oh, wonderful. I'm as gay as a tyke with a silver piece at a penny arcade.
And, the man on the streets, Detective Wolfman. What's it looking like, Detective?
Oh, it's looking pretty good. I'm just getting things ready for my trip to the Big Apple.
That's right. Detective Wolfman will be making a trip to New York, where we're going to be meeting up with some friends and hitting the town, going on a little bar
Should be
crawl.
quite the time.
Yeah. So Wayne, you have published, this is from the back of the book, just the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Imbibe, the Daily Beast, the American Scholar, and Garden and Gun, which sounds like a badass magazine just on the title alone. So what was your journey to starting writing about? Has it always been about spirits or about?
Oh no. I came in the back door. I was writing about a lot about American history. I was writing for a magazine called Preservation. I was a contributing editor there, writing about historic architecture. I was reading a lot of history for that. And I kept coming across references to rum and different contexts, slave trade, American Revolution, Prohibition. And I started thinking, what the hell's up with rum? What is this stuff? And so I thought I'd go read a book on it. And it turned out there really wasn't a good popular history of rum. So I decided I would go write a popular history of rum. So I spent 2 years researching and writing this book, tracking rum back to its commercial source, basically, which I put at Barbados around 1640, and then following it up to the present to see how it had evolved and changed, and also how rum had sort of changed and evolved the United States as it developed. So yeah, I came in through the history door. I actually didn't drink much in the way of spirits or cocktails when I started researching it. Now I don't drink anything but it was a bad influence, this research.
Yeah, it's my favorite part of the book because it's the historical part. It's just like the research that you put into it is so fascinating, and like every chapter I'm learning just new like bar trivia to just tell people. And there's 2 people in line at my job who want to read this book after, just by all the stuff I've been telling them in preparation for this. And what was that research like? I mean, there's just stuff in there where it's like, how did you even find this stuff? How do you go about finding this stuff?
Well, I started researching this around 2003, 2004. The internet was getting there, but it wasn't there yet. You couldn't just punch in terms. I don't even know if Google had really spread its wings by that point. So I was spending a lot of time in libraries. There used to be this, I think it still exists, set of green volumes called the Reader's Guide to Current Periodicals. And it's year by year. And they used to hire people to go through every magazine that came out and write a brief 1-sentence index story for what was in there. I just sat down and went through those. I looked under rum, I looked under spirits, I looked under cocktails, and then I would have to go down into the stacks and track down, Life magazine from 1937 or something, because there was a story about rum in there I wanted to read. So that was a lot of it. And then a lot of it was microfilm too, getting back to the old newspapers. So if you're of a certain age, you probably don't know what microfilm is. It's smelly. It's a long spool of negatives, or spool of shots of every page of a newspaper. You'd have to sit in the basement of the library and scroll through them. So I did a lot of that as well. And then I did a lot of traveling. I think I made 2 trips to Barbados. I went to Trinidad, I went to Cuba, I went to Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and doing the research on this, and just sort of interviewing people, and also going to archives there. Like remember in Barbados, finding there was a PhD thesis on the history of rum in Barbados that only one copy existed, and it was at the library. You had to sit in the library and read it. So things like that were key for doing the research on this. It wasn't just going to bars and drinking and asking the guy on the bar stool next to me what they knew, but I did some of that too.
Mhm.
Yeah, wow,
I
very
went-
noir.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the three of us and probably most of our audience are all big noir fans, so we know what microfilm is.
Oh, good. good, good.
Yeah.
But
it's
I
hard-
think that's probably the extent of our interaction with it.
Yes.
yeah. Like we see it in movies and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't miss it. I don't miss it. I like PDFs that you can download.
We went on like a Disney cruise, my family and I, a few years back, and we went to Barbados, and everywhere we go, there was rum punch on every island. It was like rum punch, and it always tasted different. Like I went on my stepson sent me on a solo snorkeling tour. I mean, just by myself. He was like, "Yeah, you go do that." He planned all my stuff for me, and all of it was just me by myself going. And so we went on this like snorkeling trip in these bat caves, and the guys there, they had this huge jug and they called it rum punch, but it didn't look like it was clear, but it had all these leaves and cloves and sticks and everything in it. And they were just pouring it for people who wanted it. But
That's a tradition. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know if I'm right here, but as I got towards the end of the book, I was thinking about cocktails and about like, were the cocktails just to really just mask the flavor of this stuff?
Early on, yeah, pretty much. A lot of people are believing that that's where punch came from. Punch dates back, I think the earliest reference to that of the 1500s, and it's from India, and they were drinking arak there, which was a distilled spirit from fermented palm sap, which was singularly nasty. And so you certainly would want to add some things to that to try to hide the taste. And so they'd add some spices and some sugar and some citrus juice and make something potable out of it. And that sort of carried on. So yeah, rum punch isn't a drink, it's a class of drinks, and there's endless variations on it, as you discovered in Barbados. And there they'll add things, pieces of bark and root and stuff to basically make their own spiced rum, and then maybe add some citrus to it as well. So yeah, it's a wide variety. Rum punch can come in a whole lot of varieties, but the cocktail didn't come along until the 1800s, and it built on punch. Punch has been around for a couple hundred years as a way to sweeten up and make nasty spirits more potable. Cocktails, I think, were a little more sophisticated. The stuff by 1803, when the first reference to cocktail apparently came out. 1806 it was defined, but by that time the stuff you got out of a still was not so bad. It wasn't what you were getting in the 1500s or 1600s. So it was just more like enhancing. And also at the time, 1800, spirits were considered medicine. So you had a shot in the morning because it would ward away chills and malaria and everything else that was bad to come at you during the day. So you'd add some bitters to it, you'd add some citrus to it, mostly just for taste to get the medicine to go down. So yeah, that's where cocktails, I think it may have revived during Prohibition, when there's a lot more nasty liquor around again, and people started making highballs to hide the taste of nasty liquor. But I think early 1800s it was more sophisticated than that.
Okay. The punch houses were an interesting tidbit as well. I didn't know that there were taverns and there were punch houses, and were they just like at these punch houses, was it different types of punch, or were they basically just serving one type? This is what we got.
I think probably depended on the season and what citrus they had access to. But certainly in New England, it would vary depending on whether or not they could get lemons or limes or oranges shipped up to them. If you were in Barbados, it might have been a little bit more consistent because the access to produce was a little better. But even then, it's seasonal. They have seasons for citrus, and so it would have changed at the time. But I know in New England, where a lot of punch was served up in the taverns sort of prided themselves on the quality of their punch or the uniqueness of their punch. And they touted it and they advertised it because there was a lot more regulation back then than there was now. I think everyone wants to go back to the golden days of the American Republic when everyone was free. But in fact, the government told you what you could charge for drinks in taverns for quite a long stretch. And so if you had a fixed price for punch, the way to lure in customers was not to offer cheaper punch, but better punch. And so they would make it with different fruits and different approaches and advertise that. So it would have varied, definitely would have varied seasonally. It would have varied from tavern to tavern.
Yeah, I mean, that particularly those first two chapters are really well. Also the introduction as well. The way that I found out about your book was from Twitter. A mutual, I believe he goes by the name of Austin. I think it was him. If not, please correct me. In the DMs.
Apothecary, that guy.
I don't know. It was just a regular. It's just one of my mutuals, and just randomly he posted. People will just post. We post posters of movies we're watching, books we're reading, music we're listening to, and it popped up. And Trevor had gotten me a Christmas gift, so I was like, I'm going to get him this book that I saw just because it looked interesting. And then Trevor texted me like first day he gets it, like, this book is awesome. You got to check this out. And that's how so I bought a copy too. But but the first two chapters and the introduction and everything really just going into the pirate stuff. It's like pirate history. There's American Revolution history. There's mid 20th century. It just late 1800s, like how the temperance movement and how long that took to basically lead up to the to prohibition. It just really just beautiful work. How each chapter is blocked out for this historical thing. The pirates especially, because I had asked you if there were any pirate movies you watch, because we what we do is we pair booze with movies. Trevor will I'll pick the movie usually, or we'll kind of all decide on it, and then Trevor picks the booze that he thinks will pair well with the film. And so that's why I asked you if there's any pirate movies we could talk about, and you said that there really isn't. I mean, I watched The Bounty.
Yeah, The Bounty's a good one. I mean, there's plenty of pirate movies, but I'm not all that conversant with many of them. I mean, Peter Pan is a great pirate movie. Treasure Island.
Yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean with Johnny Depp. And then I think my favorite would probably, and I consider it a pirate movie, would be Princess Bride. Is it really a pirate movie? No. So they're out there. I haven't studied them.
Yeah, one of the cool things about your book as well is at the end of the book, there's all of these recipes for cocktails. And so I'm drinking the recipe for punch. It's got tea in it. I mixed it with this stuff, this Rivers, which is a Grenadian rum.
Some of that? Where'd you get that? Is that at your local store?
I got this at Astor Wines downtown. I live in New York. Okay. I'm on the Upper West Side, so there's nothing. They don't do any interesting things here. It's kind of just basic. But so I went down there, told them that you were going to be on the show, and I was looking for pussers, particularly so that I could just stick with the book and just always tie it back into that. And then I said, is there something that you think that he had read your book as well? Is there something you think that he would find interesting or impressed by? And he pointed me to this.
I am impressed.
Are you?
That's some great stuff. I've just got a couple sample bottles of it down here. I've been looking for a full bottle down here. It disappears pretty quickly. I'm in New Orleans, where we do have pretty good access to stuff, but it's good stuff goes, and the word's out about that Rivers rum, I think. So
you can get.
It just came in the country last year, so I've had friends down in Grenada bring me back some, flask size bottles of it, but I haven't got a full size bottle.
You can order it, I believe, through Astor. You can't get booze in. You can't bring booze in, like get it sent to you in New York, but they can send it out. So they limit like.
I don't know if Louisiana's in that circuit with that. Louisiana's got some particular rules, but I'll check. I'll call. I'll check. Yeah.
Weird rules.
Available in Louisiana. I just probably have to do a special order through the liquor store.
Yeah. This stuff is crazy. I mean, I walked in, I opened it, poured a glass, walked out, came back into the kitchen. I was like, what the hell is that? I think there's a dead rat behind the stove. It
In a
is
good
so,
way.
it is so strong. So it's 138 proof.
Yeah, you want to water it down. You want an ice cube or two.
Didn't I think I read that they even diluted it to that proof so it was shippable
You
via
can't,
airplane.
yeah, you can't fly it anything above what, 69%.
70.
Yeah. So that they got it down to 69.
Yeah. Hazmat, as they call it.
But I
Yeah.
believe it's like 80 something when it comes out, like 89.
Right. Seems about right. I had a friend visited down in Grenada, and he was raving about it. He's a spirit maker, and he makes liquor in South Carolina. But he said that it had that smokiness to it because they burn off the bagasse, the sugarcane stuff, just next to the still, so the smoke just like drifts across the vats, and it just picked up the smoky smell. Don't know that they intended to do that originally, but now it's sort of become a trademark. It's almost like a mezcal in some ways. It's really like I love that Rivers rum.
Yeah, it's powered by water wheel, which is how they did it in 1785, right?
Yeah, I haven't been, but yeah, from what I've read, they crush the sugar cane. They've got water wheel, and then they just burn the scrap up right there. They probably burn the scrap to fire the boiler. That's what I'm guessing, to fire the still. So that's where the smoke gets into the still, and it's pretty intriguing stuff. I'm not sure how long you'll be able to get that, just because it seems like that place is going to blow up at any minute. It's becoming very popular, and it seems like word's getting out about it. So if it hits the shelves, it's gone.
I didn't even think about the fact that they have these open fires in the distillery.
It's been around for years, though, so they figured something out.
Yeah, they got the water there too. So,
Well, isn't it if it's a particularly dry year or something, they won't have enough water to make it?
I hadn't heard that in Grenada. That's what you heard.
Yeah, it came with this little tag on the like a descriptive tag. I'll when I bought it, and it had a lot of. This is the same guy who wrote it as the guy who I'll try to look for it. I thought it was. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So, if the it's from last night here. Okay, so up. The distillery is located in Grenada's northeast coast. Stylistically, distillery. I'm sorry. Compared to river equipment used is perhaps the most modern piece of equipment in use is a water wheel from 1840. Used to power the crushing of the sugar cane. If the river isn't flowing with enough gusto, no cane is crushed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Makes sense. So some years you're thirsty, some years you're not.
Okay. So you as a rum head, you like this stuff.
Oh yeah, that's high on my list. I like it. It's got it. It's big and it's authentic. It tastes like rum. Nobody's screwing around with that.
The taste is not, to me, it's like the taste is great. It's actually pretty smooth to sip on. And the first night I was drinking it was just straight. And but the smell was just like, the smell is so bad, which one of the interesting things about your book as well, you touch on a little bit is, I'm not going to give any big spoilers or anything, but you touch on other
spoilers in the book. So
yeah. Well,
it's American history.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to.
You know what? Independence.
But there was a lot I didn't know when I read it.
1776. Guess what happened?
What happened?
We won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry if I screwed it up for people reading it, but
Yeah.
It's going to ruin the book.
Yeah.
But I like that I didn't know that tequila also it took the top spot of like the stinkiest booze, and it used to smell like rotten eggs, I guess, when it first comes.
yeah, some of it had sulfury nastiness to it. Tequila was a little bit funky at the outset. It's why you've got that habit of salt, lime, tequila, because those two combine to sort of form an acid to just numb your mouth before you drink it.
Yeah.
Somehow it evolved into you do that after you take the shot, which I think is missing the point. But anyway,
Yeah,
That's a
that's the funniest part is like we're still doing this practice that's like nobody knows why they do it and it doesn't really
no,
matter
it's
because
fun.
tequila is
Yeah.
pretty tasty now anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're just
And
doing this useless.
I don't love the smell of tequila now, so I can't imagine what it must have been like at the
It
beginning.
was probably pretty funky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably actually given the evolution of the spirits aficionados taste buds, it would probably be pretty desirable now. Was probably like some very funky, rich mezcal. It's probably what it was like. But at the time, everybody wanted something smooth, and it was not smooth.
Right. That
Mhm.
It probably would have been fine we probably would love it. If someone found a bottle of that stuff, except for maybe the sulfur smell, it probably would have been great. I'm not sure where the sulfur came from. It might have been they were doing a reposado in old brandy barrels that had a sulfur candle put in there to fumigate them. That was a problem that happened with some scotches and other stuff at the time early on, but hasn't been a problem in a while.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the debunking of the triangle of trade was particularly interesting. Was particularly like fascinating because the way you set that up is like this is what happened, and then you kind of get to the end and you're like, but this was all bullshit.
It was actually surprising to me when I started researching it, because when I wrote the book proposal, it was like, I'll have a chapter on the triangle trade and how this had formed and created and ran for years. I started researching it and thought, wait a minute. The thing that really crystallized it for me is when I read in one historian's research, he said, no one has ever found a ship that sailed from either Massachusetts or Rhode Island, which were the two main shippers at the time, to Africa to pick up slaves, to the Caribbean to sell the slaves and get molasses, and back to New England to make rum. Not a single ship. I mean, there were different legs took place. There was definitely trade of different legs, but there was this idea came out in the late 1900s that there was this big nefarious machine. It was almost like an evil clockwork that produced all this riches for New England, and New England made all this money off of the slave trade. And it doesn't seem to be the case. There's no evidence. There's no hard evidence for this. There certainly was bits and pieces of it. And certainly the slave trade, between Africa and the Caribbean was horrendous, no matter how you parse it or whatever was fueling it. But this idea of there being this evil triangle trade seems to have been largely a myth. And it came about because there was both a push for the prohibitionists wanted to tie liquor to slavery, and the abolitionists who wanted to ban slavery prior to the 1860s wanted to tie it to liquor. And everyone wanted to pick on New England because it was being very snotty about its spiritual superiority to the Southerners who had slaves. So there's all sorts of interesting dynamics going on there. And so it was fascinating to me when I did the research. And I just remember the sinking feeling like, oh, this chapter is going to take me a lot longer than I thought it was.
Yeah. Logistically, it just doesn't even add up especially when you break it down of like how much resources it costs and also just like how many gallons of rum they would trade for two slaves. It'd be like 600 gallons for two slaves. I mean, it's a lot of.
It was fascinating to me that I didn't get a chance to get over to that part of Africa, but I talked to people and I asked about, is there a rum culture there? You would think this amount of rum had arrived over 200 years, there would have been some sort of a rum culture there. There would have been some lingering evidence of the fact that everyone was drinking rum because that was the currency. And no, there are little pockets here and there. I say, oh yeah, people like rum, but it's nothing like, you go up to some place like Newfoundland and the rum trade has been really made a big impact. I don't know if it's still true. Years ago, more than 50% of spirits consumed in Newfoundland was rum, because they traded salt cod to the Caribbean, which the salt cod was sent down there to feed the slaves working the plantations. And they sent their crappiest salt cod down to the slaves. They sent their good salt cod over to France and Spain and England because they would pay better for it. But in return, the Caribbean sent their crappiest rum up to Newfoundland, and Newfoundlanders seemed to develop a taste for bad rum. You know, their provincial rum is called Screech because that was the sound you would emit when you took a shot of it. So they still sell Screech up there. It's actually very good rum. Now they're, I think, sourcing it from Trinidad. I think it's a Trinidad Jamaica blend, maybe. But yeah, but people still drink rum in Newfoundland. So that's sort of a interesting carryover of foodways that we're not seeing, you know, anywhere in Africa. Same in New England. People always talking about, you know, brown bread and gingerbread and baked beans, all with molasses. Why? Because they got tons of molasses from the trade, and it sort of got ingrained in the culture. And stuff like that just doesn't stop. So you'd think if there was, you know, hundreds of thousands of rum going to the African coast, there would be evidence of something persisting over there. It's all interesting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating too. Like, yeah, it's really fascinating how they are like the molasses was basically like toxic waste to them. They're like, how the hell do we get rid of this? And it shows just what human beings come up with. They're like, let's fucking drink it. Let's figure out how to get drunk off this.
Even that far back, they're like, oh man, we have all this crap. It'd be a shame to just throw it away.
Yeah.
How do we use it and make money?
Yeah, they were trying to figure out a way to capitalize on that. They were using it. It was a syphilis cure. They would inject it. We don't need to think about that.
Whoa.
It was mixed with like eggshells and grass to sort of make a plaster. They were using it for some stinky ass walls when they were doing that. But yeah, they've known for a while anything with sugar can be fermented, but it took another step because, you know, you can do grain, make beer, you can do grapes and make wine. Both of those are palatable. You ferment molasses, it's not that palatable. You have to take the next step and distill it to make it worthwhile to drink. And so it took a while, you know, to get to that stage. Once they figured that out, every plantation in the Caribbean had a still, and they were, you know, exporting rum and molasses. I think it was in 1776 that Adam Smith, who wrote the book Wealth of Nations about basically the Bible of capitalism, he pointed out that the distillers or the plantation owners in the Caribbean covered all of their operating expenses just on the exports of rum and molasses. All of the sugar that they sold, which was hugely valuable at the time, was pure profit. So this was basically, sugar was like the internet fortunes of the time, or the railroad fortunes of the 1880s, or the oil fortunes of the 1910s and 20s. There's just massive amounts of money being made in the sugar plantations, and rum and molasses were sort of all part of the formula for it. But the one, you know, go back to New England, the one interesting thing going to the book is realizing just how many rum distilleries there were in New England. I think there were 160 of them on the cusp of the American Revolution, because they'd send trips down to the islands to, you know, basically to support the plantation economy. They'd send down lumber, they'd send down salt pork, they'd send out salt cod, they'd send out all sorts of stuff. And then they had basically empty boats to come back, because anything valuable from the Caribbean was going to Europe because they would pay top dollar for it. The US at the time was just a bunch of scrappy ruffians that didn't have the money to pay for fancy stuff. So the good sugar went to England, and the molasses, which nobody really wanted, went to New England. So they figured out, well, we invest in a still, we just bring back some barrels of molasses and make some rum and get some value added out of it. So they weren't stupid. They figured it out. But it was striking to me how big the rum trade was in New England on the eve of the American Revolution.
Yeah, you know, and we grow up, when you grow up in America, you know, it's Jack Daniels, then it's bourbon, right? I mean, like the culture now, it's like Pappy Van Winkle is the coveted bottle, right? Because it's the American whiskey is that is the drink, you know.
Everyone thinks that's the drink that made America.
Right.
It's true. Starting in around 1800, whiskey took over from rum. Rum fell up pretty precipitously after the Revolution because, well, we used to be 26 colonies, including 13 island colonies. So we had essentially free trade. It was much easier to go down and get molasses from them. After the Revolution, you had to deal with customs and tariffs and political squabbles. It was much harder to get the molasses. was also seen as somewhat unpatriotic to be getting stuff out of state, out of country. Whereas at the same time, starting 1780s, 1790s, everyone's pushing west from the eastern seaboard. They're going over the Alleghenies and the Appalachians. There's all of this land, and it was so rich. You could grow corn, you could grow barley, you could grow wheat. But what you couldn't do was get it back to the East Coast because there were no canals, no railways. They didn't start till the 1830s or 40s. So the best way to make, if you had corn, the best way to make it shippable was to run it through a still and put it in a barrel. That gave you all this money. Then you could put it onto a barge in Pittsburgh or anywhere in Kentucky. It would float down the river to New Orleans. It would be transferred to a sailing ship and be brought up the East Coast and sold. So it was suddenly the East Coast was flooded with whiskey because all these farmers, the only way they could really make their crop sellable was to convert it into whiskey and ship it the long way around to the East Coast. Starting in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, things got a little bit easier when the rail came in and the canals came in. But before then, yeah, there was a flood of whiskey. At the same time, it was harder to make rum. So rum sort of disappeared for quite a while and didn't really revive until the 1920s.
Right, and then before we go forward with that, can you guys get Trevor or if you can go into and Wayne too, if you want to jump in on this as well, but could you guys go into the distillation process? Like what does that mean? Because you can ferment something, but then to distill it, what's that process like? Trevor, if you want to.
Oh yeah, you take something with alcohol in it from fermentation, and then you heat it to the right temperature because alcohol boils at a different temperature than water, and you capture the vapors. That's basically what distillation is. And there's other ways to do it. Before they had technology for it, there was freeze distillation, which is the way they make like ice wine and ice beer, which is basically just either to have grapes frozen or a fermented thing frozen. And then you take the water out and leave what's left. And so that extracts a certain amount of water, leaving a higher alcohol content in the liquid. But distillation is its practice today is done by capturing vapors.
Okay, so the vapor is what we're drinking?
Yeah,
Right.
Hence the name spirit. And there's still, of course, water in there, or else it would be a gas, but
Right.
it's a certain amount. And,
Yeah. So yeah, alcohol boils at around 173 degrees, water at 212. So if you ferment something, and that's just natural. It's just yeast. If you leave something out, it's going to ferment because there's yeast everywhere. And the yeast, they basically poop out alcohol and carbon dioxide. They eat sugar and they poop carbon dioxide and alcohol.
Just like me.
It's like all of us. And but once it hits about anywhere between 8 or 12%, the yeast dies. Evolutionarily, I'm not sure exactly why this can't be. But so you get it up to about, say, 10%, 8%, 10% naturally. And then to get it higher, you have to use artificial means. And like the freeze distillations was always fascinating to me that farmers who make apple cider, let it sit out, it would ferment, they'd have hard cider. Then they could leave a bucket if it got down about 10 degrees, it needs to be pretty cold for it to work. Leave a bucket out in the barn, and every 4 or 5 hours, you go out with a ladle, and you ladle, just take the ice off, take a slotted spoon, not take the ice off and throw it away. Because not only alcohol, boils before water, but alcohol takes longer for it to freeze than water. So water freezes first. You just take the water out, and it leaves you with alcohol behind.
That's crazy.
So you can get it up. You maybe double the percentage there. You're not going to get up to the high percentage. Then it was distillation. Yeah, you just boil it in a pot. And instead of letting the steam go off into the air, you feed it into a narrow copper coil, and the coil goes through a pot of cold water, which condenses the vapor, and then it drips out at the end of the tube. You have to continually keep it cool because it's really hot, and so you have to constantly replenish the water to keep it cool so it'll continue to condense. That was one of the jobs in the Caribbean plantations, just constantly walking with buckets of water, dumping it into the still to make sure that what was called the worm stayed cool.
It's just fascinating how people came up with that. Like, how do they
Yeah.
know to do this stuff? Like, how do they learn to do this?
The Egyptians, the Arabs back in the day, they started out, they were interested in making perfume. I mean, it's pretty fascinating. If you get back into the medieval history of it, when they're in the early days, you think about the word quintessence, and this was sort of considered the quintessence. So brandy would be the quintessence of wine, and whiskey is really the quintessence of beer. But quintessence literally means the fifth element, if you translate it out from Latin. And so there were at time there were considered four elements. There was, earth, air, water, and the other one.
Fire.
Thank you. And quintessence was, the alcohol, the spirit was considered the fifth element. It was freaky. It's freaky when it came out. It just evaporated in the air really quickly. If you lit it, it burned. It was a liquid that burned. How freaky was that? If you drank it, it made you superhuman. There was also amazing things that they considered as entirely separate element, which is why it was considered medicinal for so long. It surely is something magical about this quintessence. So, yeah, they figured out. They started out with perfume. They realized they could separate out different flavor, different aromas in products. And so I think in the Egyptian or Arabic times, it was more for perfume, and then later started getting into alcohol for consumption with the Greeks and Romans, and eventually the Germans pretty much mastered that. It's also going on simultaneously. It's going on in China. I don't know as much about China history, but probably predating what was happening in Europe. But it was sort of a separate but concurrent at the time. There wasn't much overlap between the technologies. And there is some evidence that the Mayan people in Latin America had also discovered distillation independently. They had a very simple method, which is you take a big ceramic pot, you fill it with fermented beverage, you put a convex cap on it like a watch glass, but it would be made of clay. And then you had in the middle of the pot, elevated on a pedestal, a small container. And so the steam would go up, or you'd put cool things on top of the pot. You get the early alcohol would drip down to the middle and then drip down into the still and be caught by that one little cup. And so it was extremely slow. And it was probably only used by kings and medics at the time. But it seems likely that they had figured out distillation as well. Just separate it.
Was that solar powered? Like there was no fire?
No, they would have fired. They would have boiled.
Oh, they would have fired.
They would have put a fire underneath the clay pot. It would boil, condense on the ceramic top, and then drip into the pot. Drip back into a little clay catch pot down in the middle. There's some archaeological evidence that that's what they were doing with it, but it's still a little bit hasn't really been nailed down yet. But anyway, distillation. Yeah, we could talk for hours about distillation. It's fascinating, but we can move on.
No, it's something that gets, people will say it all, it's something that sort of is said in passing, but I didn't know anything about it. I mean, even if I read something about it, it's like, yeah, I don't understand what you're talking about. That's why it's like you were saying, it's this magical kind of thing that happens. And just the time that it would take, I guess, just, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have TV, and then people, books are okay, but then you get sleepy. You got to kind of fill the time up somehow. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me about it is how much earlier it probably existed until it became like commonly consumed and an industry.
So, it kind of comes from like a survival, right? Because like you said in your book, Wayne, is like drinking water was like ridiculous. Why were you drinking water? You don't drink water. You're going to die if you drink water.
Water was not that good to drink back then because people didn't understand about pathogens and microbes, and don't poop in your drinking water supply. Don't let the horses poop in your drinking water supply. So it was not the healthiest stuff to consume at the time. So beer was better. Spirits were even better. It is a little bit mysterious though, because people say, oh, they didn't drink water, they drank whiskey. But whiskey's a diuretic, meaning that you will pee out more liquid than you take in. So they must have been drinking something else beside that. I'm not exactly sure, but if you only drank whiskey, it wouldn't last that long.
Yeah, they had like beer soup,
Yeah.
right? And like the Egyptians were just they all lost their teeth by like 27 because all the sand in their beer, like their diet consisted of bread with sand in it and beer with sand in it. So they lost their teeth. It was like their teeth were like the first thing to go.
Cool.
But that's what they were drinking because they were, they're
Yeah.
they're in the desert there. They're not really, you can't really drink from the from the river. I mean, you see your buddy dying, you think, okay, I guess I'm not gonna do what that guy just did.
Yeah.
I just finished this the daiquiri from the recipe in the book. That thing is really good. My favorite cocktail was like the whiskey sour, but after reading your book, I'm a rum guy now. I went to the store and I was just looking in the window. I was just looking at all their different rums, and then I saw the whiskeys. I was like, yeah, but I'm looking at where these Venezuela and Dominican Republic and Puerto Rican rum, the daiquiri though that was really tasty.
Yeah, well, it's basically a whiskey sour with rum instead of whiskey. So that would be it's an easy transfer of taste.
Yeah.
This,
Okay.
the sweet and sour formula just works.
Yeah, it works
Yeah.
Margaritas and
yeah, there's so many drinks based on that formula. The original punch recipe was there's a little poem for it: 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak, which dates back to the 1700s, and makes for a pretty shitty punch, frankly. But
Yeah.
you just have to adapt
Pretty
it,
basic.
because at the time nobody had sugar. At the time, sugar was an amazing luxury. Nobody had sugar. Only kings and royalty got sugar, and suddenly sugar was widely available after the Caribbean was settled. And it turned out it was just like Caribbean was like waiting for sugar to come along and start growing there. And so, yeah, everyone wanted sugar. So you make a drink, you do equal parts citrus and sugar. And for modern people today, taste that and they go, whoa, that's too sweet. Except I've noticed, like in Latin America and Asia, when I travel, people still skew very sweet on drinks. But it seems like the American taste has moved a little bit more towards dry in the last 200 years.
With this Grenadian stuff is what I made the punch with. I don't think that's too sweet. I was like, no, you got to put more sugar in. I put another like lime in there. I was like, let's make this thing a little more. Because if you drink it straight, it's fine. But last night I tried like a highball, and it was really bad. It just tasted awful.
Yeah,
and as the ice melted, it got worse. So I'm just trying to figure out ways to make cocktails with it. As I was told by the guy from Master Wines, was like, first drink it straight and then figure out, you can basically mix it. There's endless kind of possibilities with it.
I tried as a tea punch. I can't remember if I have a tea punch recipe in the book or not. But that's
is that like a Swedish punch sort of thing?
No, it's super simple. It's I don't have the recipe in here. It's the way you drink rum agricole, which is rum made from sugarcane juice as opposed to rum made from molasses. In Martinique, Guadeloupe, it's basic. It's sort of like a caipirinha, a very little bit of lime and a little bit of sugar, but you let the rum shine through. And that's a great. I haven't tried
a tea punch, like a Haitian.
Like the Haitian one. It's TI, not TEA.
Yeah.
And it's like apostrophe TI because it's short for petite. So it's just like, it's called a little punch. So it's because you're making a glass at a time. So in Martinique, it's pronounced debonche. And debonche. And that's a great way for a funky rum, a funky white rum. I haven't tried it with the rivers, but as soon as I get a bottle, that's probably the first thing I would try with that, because it does have a lot of that agricole funkiness to it.
It's made with cane juice, I believe, isn't it?
I assume so. Yeah. Like I said, I haven't been down there, haven't researched, haven't talked to anybody, but I do like the taste.
And then so Pussers, right? Pussers and they bought the recipe from the British Navy in the 80s. Is that right?
That's the story. Yep. Yeah, the British Navy gave everybody a tot of rum. Not everybody, every sailor a tot of rum as part of your contract. And the tot, what defined a tot, evolved over the years. Started out quite a bit. I think it was like a pint or two. Everybody got every day.
It's a lot.
God save the Queen.
Mhm. Navy strength too.
Get up into the rigging. Yeah. So they cut it back until I think it was 1971 is when the last of the tot was issued. And then they stopped doing it. They had big ceremonies for ending the tot. But pussers is just slang for purser, which is the person who controls, basically the accountant on the boat, the one who controls
Okay.
stores, who gets paid, how much you get allotted for food, all that was controlled by the purser. And so that's where the name pussers comes from. Purser was widely hated because they were felt to be constantly gypping the sailors. And there were a lot of corrupt pursers who would, basically they'd take half a barrel of rum, siphon it off, sell it to somebody, and then refill the barrel with water, assuming the sailors wouldn't know. But the sailors knew, and so they started the proof test, which was sort of done on the deck of the boat during that time. And they bring up a barrel of rum, they ladle some out, and they mix some with some gunpowder grains, black powder, and then try to light it on fire with a magnifying glass. If it lit on fire, then it was proof. I mean, this is where the word proof comes from. They proved
Wow.
They proved that it was had not been watered down. If it didn't flare up, the purser had some answers to give on that.
Can you imagine being the first purser and being like,
that is not the job I want on a trapped on a ship with a bunch of pissed off sailors for God knows how long.
Watering their room.
Yeah. I like the branding too, because it's like, we stole this from sailors.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, because I've been like trying to travel in rum nerd circles for the last few weeks to learn more about, I work in booze marketing. So I try and study what like people who are passionate within a community about a certain spirit are talking about. And I go to Reddit for this sometimes, and I saw people who were reading your book, Wayne, and they were posting that on there in the rum subreddit. But also, I learned about the modern practice of testing rum, where they do a hydrometer test, which was something I'd never heard anyone else in spirit nerd communities doing, to see if there is sweeteners.
Oh yeah, that was fairly recent. Well, that started, I believe it was Denmark, that if you were going to import a spirit into the country, it had to be tested by the Danish lab. And then they could figure out from that how much sugar you put in there. Was it 14 grams per liter? Was it 25 grams per liter? No grams per liter. And so they published that, which caused quite a stir in the rum circles. I think it was probably 10 or 12 years ago. And then a lot of people started getting their own hydrometers and bringing them around and testing rums to see who was, what the phrase that everyone uses is doping, who was doping their rum. Rum can be really harsh. You add a little bit of sugar to it, you add a little bit of molasses or vanilla, mellows it right out. But that's sort of cheating.
So all right. So in the movie The Bounty, because I was like, I got to watch a pirate movie or something, and I hadn't watched The Bounty. It's got Mel Gibson, Anthony Hopkins. It's got Daniel Day-Lewis and
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson, all the heavy hitters.
A lot of perfect breasts.
Yes, and but
great Tangerine Dream soundtrack.
Oh yeah, the Tangerine Dream soundtrack is incredible.
Vangelis.
Vangelis is it made the same guy who did the Blade Runner soundtrack. But there's a moment, and they only mention rum once. They mention grog. And the Liam Neeson character, who is the captain, that's Bly, right? Captain Bly. And
that's Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins.
Sorry. Yeah. Did I say Mel Gibson? I mean, so it's Anthony Hopkins is playing Captain Bly, and Mel Gibson is playing Christian, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I think that's his name.
but the whole thing about the movie,
Christian.
Fletcher Christian, yeah. And so the whole thing though is like you're taught that Fletcher Christian is the bad guy. He's the bad guy of the story. Okay, so I'm trying to watch this and I'm going to go, like I'm watching The Dark Knight. I'm going to try to figure out the Joker's position here. What's Mel Gibson's, what's Fletcher Christian's like I'm going to just originally side with him. But Anthony Hopkins at a certain point, the only mention of grog is that he restricts the daily rations of grog. And a little kind of thing, red flag went off in my head. And was that legal? Could you just cut off the daily grog from the sailors?
Oh, the ship's captain was emperor and king. They could do whatever they wanted. They risked really pissing off the sailors if they did things like that. But their goal was to keep order on board the ship, and if they felt that the grog was causing a problem, they could do that. There were some, regulations in the British Navy and the American Navy, which stipulated how much you would dole out. But I think there tended to be a maximum. And if supplies ran low, they could change things up. If there were discipline problems, they could change things up. They had that option to do that.
Okay.
Grog. The word grog is basically watered down rum. They used to serve sort of straight rum to the sailors, but then it was a guy named Admiral, I think it was Edward Vernon, might have the first name wrong, but his nickname was Old Grog because he wore this canvas coat that was sort of waxed, and that was a material called grog rum, and he always wore it, so they called him Old Grog. And he's the one that decreed that the rum should be watered, and he cuts. This is fleet wide. Everyone had to cut the rum with water before they served it to sailors, because I guess he noticed people falling out of the mast and going overboard.
Slow the man down.
And he also blamed you pull into a port in Jamaica, and the sailors would get drunk and they'd desert and would get back on the ship. And so he saw there was a lot of problems with rum, and he tried to curb it. So the name grog came from his order to water the rum. And so to this day, grog is just watered rum.
Okay. And then when you added the limes, that's where the limey thing comes from, the derogatory term for British
Right. Yeah.
people, limey.
They figured out that scurvy, you needed citrus. If you had, scurvy was nasty. Your bones would ache, your teeth would fall out, your gums would recede. It wouldn't have been pretty. So somebody figured out, I can't remember what year it was. Actually, the British Navy sort of figured it out before the scientists did. They started serving lime drinks, so punch, things like that. And the scurvy was not a problem on those boats. So that became a policy. And it wasn't until later that they figured out the scientific reason that it was vitamin C. Well, I don't think they figured out what vitamin C was for another 100 years, but eventually they figured it out that if you had rations with limes, then you would not get scurvy. So yeah, the British soldiers became limeys.
You can get, there's this, I think they're a distributor or something called Blacktop. Yep. You can buy, it's $1,200, but you can buy one of these leftover, I guess from these barrels. They still have these barrels that
they were out of the barrels, because the barrels, that would have been way too oaky if it was like,
sure,
A, it would have evaporated, and B, it would have been super oaky, like 35 years old. No, they had them in glass carboys. They were wicker covered carboys. I mean, the British Navy had its systems. They had someone in England in charge of sourcing the rum, bringing in a blend from, I think it was Barbados, Jamaica, and Guyana, possibly. And then they would blend it, the British Navy blend, the right proof, and then they would store it in these glass carboys where it didn't age any further, so it could be used indefinitely. And so there was a bunch left over in 71, 72, when they stopped issuing tots to the British Navy. And it got scattered around. It wasn't held by the Navy. There was people that got it, and they were hoarding it. And there's a guy in England that got wind of this and went and bought it all up, everyone he could find, and then had it rebottled, or had it bottled out of the carboys. And yeah, started, I think, at $1,000 a bottle, now $1,200 a bottle. But they just released a year or two ago the 50th anniversary Black Tot, which was a recreation. So they took the original Black Tot that was left and they brought in some blenders and they attempted to recreate it. And it's significantly cheaper. I think maybe $60, $70 a bottle. It's very good rum.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know.
Got a bottle right over there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you.
I think I finished it. I don't see it. Why is the rum always gone?
Where did it go?
I was going to ask you, what are you drinking right now? You were talking about Zacapa.
Zacapa, which is it's one of the sweetened rums. It's owned by Diageo. It didn't used to be. And it's made in Guatemala. It's made from sugarcane grown on the Pacific coast of Guatemala. Once the rum is made, they truck all the barrels up to the highlands, up to about, I think, 6,000 feet in the mountains where it's always like 72 degrees, sort of perfect temperature for aging rum. And they used to age it for 23 years up there. And it was amazing rum. Diageo bought it. They started releasing it a little bit earlier because there was demand for it. And so now it's called Zacapa 23, but the 23 is just decorative. It doesn't really mean anything.
It's a Solera rum, isn't it?
They claim that. I've been there. I visited both the distillery and the aging process, and they do a Solera style. Not Solera is very for sherry. It's actually barrels that are connected one to the other. They don't quite do that, but they do move it from barrel to barrel. And
Okay.
they'll age it in bourbon barrels for a while. They'll age it in Pedro Jimenez barrels for a while. And I think they start combining some of the older with the newer for consistency. So it's Solera style, I would call it, not a Solera one. But the one that I've got here, which is just a small little sample bottle, I did a seminar 8 or 9 years ago, and I asked some of the distillers what were some of the rums that you made but never released. Actually, with some spirits. I think we had some whiskeys too. And this was one that was made on the Pacific coast and aged on the Pacific coast. So they aged it was much hotter environment. And they decided they didn't like it, so they didn't release it, but they still had a bunch of barrels of it. So I got a little sample of it. And it's very delicious. And the thing that's great about it is that this is not sweetened. So it's sort of the Zacapa rum as it would be before it was doctored for the American palate, by being made sweeter. I've got a friend who said he likes Zacapa, but he only wants it on a snow cone because it's that sweet. It's almost like a syrup. So I'm drinking some of that. And I've also got a Four Square rum from Barbados.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
From 2007 and bottled in 2019. It's 60% alcohol. This is freaking delicious.
And do you prefer straight up or are you making cocktails?
Right now I'm drinking straight up because here in New Orleans, it was a brisk like 38 degrees last night and only up in the 40s, 50s today. So I could use a straight rum right now, but in the summertime when it's 450 degrees here and 150% humidity, then I'll be having something much lighter and brighter mixed up in a cocktail.
Okay. Yeah, I really like the tiki culture.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I read it in the book that I was like, oh yeah. Like you watch movies, whether they're noir film, whatever movies that take place. So there's always these like Tropicana kind of palm tree things. I think Trevor, you took me to a bar when I lived out in LA there, or either I lived out there when we went. Anyway,
we
went
go
to this
to
place.
Tiki Tea.
Yes, we went to a tiki bar.
Tiki Tea is a classic. That is one
Oh,
of the greatest bars in the country.
I think
Trevor's
it's the last place you can smoke in LA County or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know if you still can.
Might be. I don't know either. It was owned by the same family. And if it's a family establishment with no outside employees, you can smoke in it because you're only putting your family at risk. So they allowed it there. I don't know if they still do either, but
yeah, it wasn't until after reading that, and then Trevor, I remember that you took me to this bar, which like as you get more and more drunk, you're like, wow, man, this like I feel you do feel transported.
It's good.
There's a cool vibe to those places.
Oh yeah.
And you mentioned them when in your book. There's a bunch of places, modern places now that do this, but you didn't mention any in New York. I was wondering if you knew if there was any in New York City.
There's a one that just opened recently that's sort of, I think, leapt to the top of the pack. I'm hoping I get the name right. It's Sunken Harbor, and it's in Brooklyn. and
Okay.
it's above a steakhouse.
Okay.
I believe that's the name. All the names sound a little bit the same. Where was I just out in Seattle, and there was one. Is that I can't keep them straight. It's a little embarrassing. Forbidden Island, maybe. Anyway, yeah, that one's. I've seen pictures of that one. I think it just really opened within the last couple of months. It looks pretty amazing.
Sunken Harbor Club, is that what it is?
I think so. Let me ask
Okay.
them.
That it says downtown Brooklyn. So, Wolfman, when you're in town, maybe we can go head over there. This place does look really freaking awesome.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. But it says club. Do we have to be
It's
sailors
open.
to get
It's
in?
open. Nope.
You got to
It's-
dress island casual.
I'll bring a tie.
Above Gage and Tollner is the steakhouse that was slipping my mind. So, yeah, that one is great. But yeah, it's been interesting. New York sort of has had tiki bars come and go. They haven't established themselves as they have in other places. I'm not exactly sure why that is. There was one called Painkiller. It was great for
I've
quite
been
a
there.
while. And then it was forced to change its name because the Painkiller is one of the few drinks that actually has a defendable trademark
Oh wow.
By Pussers.
by Pussers. In fact, yeah.
They've shut down.
Those
They
pricks.
shut down. They shut down a place.
That
They
was it.
completely close it. They will sue you. So they will
was
like
it. Yeah.
if you
Painkiller.
yeah.
Got shut
Yeah.
The pusser strikes again.
I think they, yeah.
Gosling's is the
Bus
same as
stops
well,
here.
right? Gosling's owns the Dark and Stormy.
Right.
So
Yeah,
if you-
Gosling's has the Dark and Stormy. That's one of the other ones. I remember when one of the Gosling's representative was looking at my book when it first came out, when I was at a rum event, flipped back to the recipe, saw the recipe, and I said that Gosling's is recommended. It's recommended. It's required. We could sue you for this.
Wow.
Yeah, knock yourself out, dude.
Vicious.
Knock yourself out.
Yeah.
I could use the publicity.
That's right. That's right.
I'll go through the roof. Yeah.
That'll only make you stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't think of the seal as such a vicious animal, but
They're kind of dog-like,
they
like
bite,
mad
yeah.
dogs.
Seals are assholes.
They got-
yeah. You can train them. You can train them to be vicious, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm drinking something from the same distillery. I'm not drinking it now, but just like this week as Zacapa. It's
Oh, yeah.
this
Oh, yeah.
stuff. I don't even think they make this label anymore. I found it on Closeout.
I think you can still get that like in Latin America. I don't think you can get it here in the US anymore.
What's it called for
Yeah.
the listeners? Just it's
Ron-
Ron.
Viejo.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they switched to age stated from what I could discern. It's not very good, but it's nice and coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
But for the podcast, I'm drinking this stuff, which I love. And I found it kind of as a dusty. I've never seen this in the US. You
What
know,
is that?
the XM special, it's Banks.
That's Banks.
Yeah. Yeah. It says it's
I've seen that one.
bottled and blended in Guyana. But I from what I could discern on the internet, it's not necessarily distilled there.
I'm sure it is.
You think so? It's got that.
Ship anything to Guyana to
character.
bottle it.
Yeah.
But that, you said that's Banks rum. I don't see the Banks name on there.
It's really small in the back. It says Thirst Park, Georgetown. I don't know if you can see.
That's out of
No.
but
Yeah.
I'll-
yeah.
I'll check
I
on that.
I guess it's like something they don't export much. And they have the same liquor store I found it at. They have a ton of 5-year, and I'm thinking about getting more because it's delicious.
Yeah,
And this
find
was only
something
20
like that.
bucks.
really, that's a good deal.
Yeah, the 5-year is 15, but I think it'll be worth it.
Yeah. Report back.
I
That's
sure
the-
will.
That's the best part is about rum is that once you get rum pilled, you realize that you can have a really good time, a really tasty time, and impress people, and you don't have to, break the bank like you would with like a Pappy Van Winkle thing. You know what I mean? Like it's the most expensive thing I saw aside from that Blacktop, with that $1,200 bottle is like $200.
That was my experience at this liquor store. Is like they have a lot of super rare stuff. And I was like, well, I'm looking for a cool rum. And the guy was a little flummoxed. He didn't know what to do. He's like, oh, we have a Diplomatico. And he didn't know what to do. And they had a ton of Dusties, like cool stuff in every category. But the only thing, like all those Sazerac products, like those Buffalo Trace cult bourbons, like Pappy and Weller and stuff, were all like 10 times suggested retail. And all the rums were like on closeout. So if you develop a taste for rum right now in the United States, you'll drink all the cool stuff without waiting in line and overpaying for it. Except I might make the exception for a few that have kind of been discovered. I think there is a premium on like some of those plantation and Foursquare rums. And
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember I tasted these, I forget the name of it's Dictador.
Oh yeah.
They had all these like master cask things, and those were like, whew, those were spendy.
Really?
Yeah, like close to 10 grand, some of them.
What?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, they were several $1,000s.
They're just grabbing for the financier money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No human's gonna buy that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, and if you do, you'll be disappointed. If you drink for like the pleasure of the spirit for your money, you're almost certainly going to be disappointed whenever you spend that kind of money, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like the cool thing about rum, as I've been getting into it, is like everyone tastes different. Whiskey, it's like it's whiskey, and then it gets more whiskey, and then it gets, same thing with vodka. I mean, this tastes even more, there's no taste, it's even more clear. But with rum, there are very distinct flavors, no matter what you're drinking with it. I know they've added in infused flavors, which aren't my favorite type of things to drink, but just naturally, like different places, just their process that they use, where they're getting it from. It really, it's almost similar to wine in that way, that depending on where you're getting it from, it's going to have a very different vibe to it.
Well, it's true, and it's an immature category. You think about whiskey. Nobody goes into a bar and says, "I'll have a whiskey." I'll have a bourbon or a rye or a Scotch or Canadian whiskey or an Irish whiskey. It's all whiskey, but they've become grouped by category because they have different tastes, different traditions, different cultures, and so that it's split up. Where rum hasn't reached that, except now it's sort of dividing. There's rum and rum agricole. The rum agricole is made from sugarcane juice. And it's grassier and more herbal than the molasses-based rum. So you're starting to see that division sort of cement itself. But yeah, the Jamaican rum has its own distinctive taste. Barbados, Cuba, Puerto Rico is very light traditionally. So it's all these different jurisdictions. So all the other ones I mentioned, Scotch, Canadian, Irish, bourbon, has to be made in one jurisdiction. Bourbon can only be made in the US, Irish whiskey only in Ireland, Scotch only in Scotland. And so there's a set of rules that sort of, decides what it's going to taste like in broad strokes. You can play around within that. Bourbon has to be 51% corn, but it could be 70% corn. It could have wheat. It could have rye as a flavoring ingredient. It could be 100% corn. So there are some flavors within those regulations, but for the most part, there's a coloring book and you have to color within the lines. Where rum is like, fuck it all, just do what you want, because we have each of these different Jamaica, there's rules. Barbados, there's rules. Martinique, there's definitely rules for that, but they're all completely different sets of rules. So you can sort of move around. You can move around and shop the flavor you like depending on where you're from. But it's all still considered rum. No one refers to. I mean, they used to refer to it back in the colonial days. Everyone said, "I'm getting, get a barrel of good old Barbados or get a barrel of Jamaican." or get a barrel of Martinique. They sort of refer to it just like people refer to Scotch or Irish today. And
Cubans.
Cuban,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then they
The
think about cigars. That's taken out. But it's yeah, rum is still sort of an immature category, and so it tastes different because it comes from so many different places. Any place that grows sugar probably has a rum industry.
Wow.
yeah, and some that don't, I guess, just because of like blenders and local tastes and stuff. And I've noticed some craft distilleries, they just source and they make rum without even being anywhere near the tropics.
Well, a lot of them are importing molasses and making
Yeah.
rum, just like they did in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Example is Privateer Rum in Massachusetts, which makes excellent rum. And they're in Massachusetts. They're not getting sugar cane from, the Berkshires. They're bringing in molasses they were bringing it in from Guatemala. I'm not sure where it's coming from now. But yeah, so there are a lot of distillers who are making rum who are bringing in molasses or evaporated sugar cane, or they're bringing in sugarcane juice, which is rare because it spoils quickly. But there are others who are blending. I know that I just did a story for Garden and Gun magazine about Campesino rum out of Alabama, and it's a young guy there in his mid-20s who liked rum, and he sourced some rum from I think he got it from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Cuba, and Jamaica, and he's got his own blend, and that just came on the market last year, and it's very good. But it's all great rums, and he's got a good palate for blending them. So that's another thing. It's sort of merchant bottling. There's no shame in that. The shame is when a craft distiller tries to pretend that they made it when they didn't. Then it's just bad, false marketing. But like a lot of them, like Old Scout does that for whiskey. They report on where they're getting their bottles from. And if you're going to source rum, great. And this guy from Alabama, he tells you what distillery he bought it from and what the percentage is in the blend. So he's being very transparent, which I think is great.
I was just thinking when you were talking about appellations in rum, which I do think, like you said, it's immature. We could go a lot further into identifying what makes rum from different parts of the world unique. And on the box of that XM Banks, I'm going to show you something else out of focus. They have it in 3 languages. And it occurred to me that rum would be relatively difficult to research compared to whiskey because it does come in 3 languages.
It's true. It's true. And that's not including Portuguese.
Oh, yeah. Or isn't there a little bit of Dutch stuff too or something?
Dutch, oh, yeah. So a lot of them from back in the colonial day. But Portuguese is really the tough one. So I think, and Ed Hamilton, who makes a rum, has done a lot of rum research. He's pretty sure that rum was a pretty good commercial industry in Brazil before it was in Barbados, 1640. I bet he's right, but I don't speak Portuguese and can't go into the archives. Plus, there's the other problem that a lot of the archives were destroyed because they were along the coast and there were pirates coming along, burning cities. Also, there was this thing that when you were in Brazil, it was a colony of Portugal, just like the Spanish colonies down there. They prohibited the export of rum because the brandy industry in Europe was strong enough that they didn't want to have to deal with competition. So any rum that was made and exported, probably there wasn't any paperwork on it. It's a lot of issues, but there's probably rum being made in Brazil early on. I make the argument in my book that Barbados 1640 is the base of the commercial rum. All the rum you see on the shelf today can trace itself back to Barbados 1640, when somebody figured out how to make it efficiently and how to export it and how to make money on it, and everything's grown from there. People probably figured that out in Brazil, but it was sort of like the Neanderthals. It was a line that died out, and the Barbados rum was the Homo sapiens that survived.
Interesting.
That's my theory. I'll stick with it.
Were those early Brazilian rums made from cane juice as they are today, or were they molasses based?
Probably. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think there's any evidence in either direction for that. Probably some of each. I mean, they certainly had molasses left over from the sugar processing getting through the sugar processing. Basically, molasses is industrial waste, so they probably would have figured out how to make that as well. But right now, the cachaça they make down there tends to be from sugarcane juice. So there's that long tradition of making it from sugarcane juice. There's argument in either direction, and I don't think there's any historic evidence, at least none that researchers that I know have uncovered for the process of making rum in the 1600s in Brazil.
What I really like about the pussers is I can taste that aftertaste, that molasses aftertaste. It's got this syrupy, nice little. It's the aftertaste.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a molasses taste of pussers.
And you don't need when you're sipping rum, at least like the darker rums, the stuff like pussers, rivers too as well. But I don't really need a chaser. Whereas like a lot of whiskeys or, you need like you have to, but most rums have like this really nice, beautiful aftertaste that doesn't burn the throat. You don't feel it going down like you will like an Irish whiskey or something where you're just like, this is good, but you feel it, it does something to your voice. But with rum, it's like, I don't know. It just has always has like a nice sweet aftertaste that it leaves with you.
Good rums do. There's some shitty rums out there that will also change your voice.
What would you categorize those as? I mean, like, you can name some.
I don't want to name names, but if it was a Puerto Rican rum that started with a B and ended with an I might put them.
Oh,
okay. Yes, that's true. That's
great rum. They used to make great rum.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's what I bought for the daiquiri. But if you're trying to get that old school Bacardi taste that it used to taste like, is there somebody who makes something that is close to it?
You could get there was one. They actually went specifically for that, and but it shut down. That was the 86 Co. They what was the name of their rum? I can't recall the name of their rum. It was but they actually went. There was a distiller who worked for the Cuban rum distiller, and then he moved to Venezuela. He left Cuba and started his own company down there. And it does a lot of contract rum. And they came to him. They said, "You worked for this company in Cuba for years. Can you make this rum?" And he's like, "No, it bores me. I did that for years. I'm making new stuff, different stuff." And they convinced him to create sort of an old style rum. They said, "We want people to be able to taste the daiquiri that you would have had in Cuba in like 1960, going down, or even earlier if you went down during Prohibition in the 1930s or 20s, what you would have had." So we decided, okay, I'll do that. So he ended up making rum for them. I think it's on the Daily Beast. There's 4 bars that I contact around the country that have their own blend that imitates Cuban rum. And they use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, some Appleton, I can't remember what else is in there. But I did a blind taste test with a bartender friend, and we compared it against some Havana Club. Some of the better Havana Club, because a lot of these bars want to make a Cuban style daiquiri, but they can't get Havana Club, which is the sort of the legit Cuban rum these days, because it's banned from import. So they came up with combinations, and we did blind taste tests of 4 different combos against a good Havana Club. And there was one, it's actually a bar in New Orleans, I think, that came the closest. It's called Manolito. I don't recall what the recipe was. I think this ran about 4 or 5 years ago. But if you want to find a good Cuban rum that was like what you would get back in the day, you've got to reverse engineer it. You've got to hack it. But
oh wow,
if you Google Daily Beast Wayne Curtis Cuban rum substitute.
I love these sorts of stories in booze where something of the magic is lost, but the history is left. And so people go after it. that
So if you're like
and
a
they
new,
try
like
and
yeah.
rebuild.
Yeah, it's like a
And
new
often
generation
it
of
happens.
alchemists.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Like if you're like if you're sort of a traditionalist or sort of the leftover hippie, not hippie, hipster kind of set, you can kind of do some detective work and either make
Right.
it yourself. So you have to be an entrepreneur, I guess, to be able to have the capital to try to recreate this thing, because it's I guess what you guys are saying is you can't have a
Well,
daiquiri that Hemingway was having, right? It's not
You
going to
can
taste
get-
the same.
Well, the original one was that I was trying to remember was called Cagna Brava, which was made by 86 Co. That's no longer made. They stopped producing. And that was one that Manolito, I did use those search terms, and it was the second hit on the list, which is just 4 recipes for recreating fake Cuban rum. But the original called for 6 parts of El Dorado 3 parts of Cagna Brava White, 1 part of Smith and Cross. You might be able to substitute the Cagna Brava White with something like an Appleton White if you can find that. But there are other ones that, well, that required Cagna Brava. They all required Cagna Brava. Oh, no,
interesting.
it's a bar in
Well,
Seattle.
nuts.
This
Yeah.
bar in Seattle called Rumba, which calls for Plantation Dark, Don Q Gold, Don Q Añejo, Plantation 3-Star, and Mount Gay Black Barrel. So 5 different rums they combined to make something that it imitates the Cuban. I think we were using the Havana Club Añejo Reserva when we did our taste test.
So during COVID, right, during lockdown, like everybody was drinking. That's just what people did. It's just what you would do. You know, I mean, that's what we did here. I mean, in my house, and you just drink. I drank more than I usually drank, just to be able to go to sleep, take the anxiety off, all this stuff. So it's like you have this, and I do think that there is a new sort of wave of, I think it's small, but it's starting to get of people who are into. It's partly why I wanted to start this show was because to get the drinking basically popular again, not being an alcoholic, but just appreciating booze.
Drinking fall out of favor? Did I miss something? It was unpopular.
It's not so much that it fell out of favor. It's just more like everyone reverts to the mean.
Okay.
And so the mean is like just basic bitch shit, where you're like, you were saying in your book, it's like from like the 1920s or 1930s on, you got this modernism thing where it's like everything's got to taste clear, everything's got to look gray, everything's got to be like bland and I don't want to taste it. This is too bitter, or just too this. Even me just bitching about like the smell of the rivers, but like whether it's the art of the cocktail, where you can taste the spirit as well, like this part of the flavor of the spirit is part of the cocktail, not like this is just completely diluting the booze and you just get this nice little sweet little treat for you.
And that's why Bacardi's the big villain,
right
of the rum loving community, I think, is because they're trying to turn rum into vodka, and vodka, of course, is still the most popular spirit in the US, even though whiskey wins the hearts of a lot of people in like who are into booze. The best selling spirit is vodka.
Mostly it's like dietary shit. Like with vodka, it's like the idea is like, well, if you drink vodka, it doesn't have that much caloric intake. People are concerned about,
which is
people
bullshit.
Stupid.
Yeah. Calories come from alcohol.
Yeah.
And the higher the proof it is, the more calories you'll ingest. Mm-hmm. And they're always trying to find a workaround. That's why the seltzer industry has figured out exactly how much alcohol they can put into something to call it 99 calories.
Right.
Well, and the vodka is the least intrusive in a cocktail. So
no
really,
tell, no smell.
Yeah, people they want to be drunk, but they want to taste, a Coke Zero or whatever.
Right.
So they reach for vodka.
Yeah.
But the whole thing with the with booze, it's the problem with everything is, yeah, it's this it's just, yeah, trying to make everything the same and bland and gray and dull, so that just like the removal of character from everything. It's just like to completely streamline all walks of life into like a frictionless flavor.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, and it works. That's the reason that Bacardi is owned by Bacardi, and Mount Gay is owned by Remy Cointreau, and such. Of the major spirits conglomerates, the only one with rum on the name of the building is Bacardi, and they wouldn't do it if it didn't work. And I was thinking about how one of my very favorite rums is made from sourced Bacardi, which is a no-no, and it's made with additives, which is also a no-no, and it's Solera style.
What do you mean when you say? Okay, I'm sorry. What is it called?
Which I know, Wayne, you like too, because you put it in your book.
Which one?
Ron de Barrilito.
Oh yeah, that is good.
I love it. It's one of my favorite things. Yeah.
Just to sort of, because you guys mentioned this before, what is Solera style?
Solera style is an aging technique. It started by the sherry industry. They imagine 3 rows of barrels, one on top of the other. You fill up the top barrel with your new distillate. You let it age for a while. You put about half of it down in the barrels below it. Let that age for a while. So you have 2 half barrels. Then you refill the top barrel with new distillate, and you take refill the second level of barrels with a combination after it's aged. Then you take half of that and you put it in the third level of barrel. So you just basically don't let the barrels go below half full. You just keep refilling it with some from above it, from newer stuff. So at the bottom, you end up with stuff where technically, if you've had a Solera running for 100 years, you've got 100-year-old spirit or 100-year-old sherry in the bottom level, because you never fully empty the barrel. You just keep topping it off. So you have several layers of that. So Solera is a way of aging and a way of ensuring consistency in a product.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can balance the features of older wine or liquor with the features of younger. And I feel like it is, especially as in the case of rum, the less honest distilleries will be like, oh, this contains 40-year-old rum, and the more honest ones maybe just say this is made from a Solera, average age or not, But,
Okay.
and sherry bodegas do that too.
Yeah. Under federal law, you have to, if you put an age on your label, it has to be the youngest one. So you could have a rum that has 8-year rum, 15-year rum, 25-year rum, but on the label it has to say 8-year rum. And the rest can't be mentioned. They can mention it in the marketing material and on the
Exactly.
back.
Yeah.
You can't put it on the front of the label.
It can't be age stated as such.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ingenuity of the oh God, what I forget. It's later in the book. It's in the last chapters where it's like these guys just knew how to market. I forget exactly where it's at, but it's towards the end, sort of one of the last chapter. Maybe it's the Mai Tai. Yeah, I believe it's like the Mai Tai chapter, but just the way that these guys were able to market things was pretty brilliant.
Yeah, I think maybe that chapter I talk about how basically marketing became independent of rum itself.
Yeah.
It was an idea, as we get things like Captain Morgan and all coming in, it's just like creating this lifestyle. There were, I don't know if I mentioned it in the updated version, but there was a spirit company, I think it was rum that had artificial flavors put in there, and they created these machines that when you walked by in the aisle of the liquor store would waft out like perfume.
Oh yeah, it's in the copy I have.
And it seemed to me that was the end of the rum when you were just divorcing it entirely from the flavor of rum and just sort of creating something separate to it. But I think that was sort of how I ended the original edition, which came out in 2006. The updated version from 2018, when I wrote the book the first time, there were only 2 craft rum distillers in the United States. There was one in Tennessee and one in New Orleans. And when I did the updated version, there were well over 200 craft rum distilleries in the US, and they were doing some fascinating, interesting, sort of groundbreaking stuff. So I wanted to give them, I knew the book needed to be updated to give them credit for what they were doing. So I feel in some ways we're going back to where we started with small distillers and small stills doing experimental stuff, trying to figure things out. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if there's any listening to this, try to remake the Bacardi original formula there.
The edition I have, the last thing that's mentioned in it, I don't believe you named the distillery by name in the book, or maybe I missed it, but I believe it's Lost Spirits.
Yeah,
is that who you were visiting?
I think I named Lost Spirits in there.
Oh, you did?
Brian
Okay.
Davis. Yeah, he's doing some science fiction kind of shit on his, like, trying to do speed aging. Just to me, one of the themes running through the whole book is I thought rum was the quintessential American spirit because it really involves experimentation and bootstrapping and figuring shit out as you go. And I like to see that. I think I mentioned Privateer and Lost Spirits at the end of this revised edition. And those are both people doing really great experimentation. Privateer, because they are experimenting with traditional methods, bringing them back, including one of, in the wintertime in the north, the staves shrink and some of the whiskey oozes out between the staves, and then it oxidizes on the outside of the barrel. There's this sort of sticky resin. And I know that Privateer is going around scraping some of that off with razor and mixing it with high proof spirit and using that as a flavoring ingredient to put that back in, which was because the distiller had read about that being done in an early distillation manual from the 1800s, thought they'd try it. So they were experimenting that way, whereas Brian Davis is trying to make a 30-year-old rum in 6 days by using this bizarre and now patented system he has of putting wood into these huge tubes and blasting it with super high volume light to do it. There's others who are doing it with sound. You can break down wood with light or with sound and speed the process of aging. There's some asterisks around that, whether they're successful or not. And I think that Brian has been partially successful, as have some of the other experimenters, but they're not there yet. But to me, that's sort of what is great about rum and the American experiment, which is you just keep tinkering with things until you figure it out.
Yeah.
300, 400-year history of rum is just keep tinkering with it and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. And I really like the idea that, like, John Adams was, like, begrudgingly having to go to these places where people were drinking rum, these, like, rum houses, and having to, like, deal with people. And he was just totally turned off, but he had to, he had to navigate it politically, because this is where all of the dialectic was going on, like all of the talk, if you wanted to be, like, cool, I guess, for whatever that word was back then politically, you had to kind of go into these places and figure out what these people were talking
You
about.
sort of see that, someone like John Kerry going to a MAGA rally and trying
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that wouldn't.
I got to do this, but I don't want to.
Right.
Blood in the water.
Right. Just having to put up with this thing. And it's a shame because like hipsterdom kind of ended in, like, 2013, but, like, that would be the people that you kind of want to do it, because at least some of those people were really striving for authenticity.
Right.
Well,
right
one,
now,
one thing.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead, Wolfman. You haven't.
I was just gonna say, just like adding a little footnote to what you were saying is, I always like to remind myself that just because shitty people like a thing doesn't make that thing shitty.
Right.
So just because hipsters were into a certain thing doesn't necessarily mean that it sucks.
Right,
yeah,
right, right.
one of the things that they got right was this urge to get back to traditional sources or traditional methods, of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that, like, when we talk about like the tiki bar culture kind of thing is like, we don't have the next thing. You know what I mean? Like there's that was like a culture, and people would like it was a fashion thing or a fad thing, and it was a wave. And we haven't had a wave in like a decade. There's been no wave. Any wave that comes up becomes politically charged or something, and it's immediately like toxic. So whether it's from the right or the left, you can't really approach it. But there isn't this like, you know what I'm saying? Like everything's framed in a political sense instead of a cultural sense of like everyone's going to the tiki bar, everyone, and we're drinking Mai Tais or mojitos or whatever it is.
Tiki tortures have certainly been appropriate.
Exactly.
Well,
but
so,
in a very turned off kind of way, instead of like, where's the next wave of bringing back something classic, or there's no new revival, in my opinion, culture.
I think it's been a lot of it has been that the Gen Xers and those that follow is this whole mass customization thing where nobody wants to be part of a trend. They're allergic to trends. If there's a trend, they go the other way because they want to express their own personal identity by showing what they do. So if everyone's going to tiki bars, they're going to go, I'm going to go have a martini or something, even though that's what their grandparents did. I think there's a lot of trends these days. So I think it's hard for them to catch any sort of wave.
And the closest thing to a wave, I feel like, has been breweries. All the new like local breweries popping up everywhere, which
beer.
on the one hand, I appreciate, because it's a great way for people in a town or a city to kind of like dive into their locality and like take some pride in where they live and the way that they brew their beer. But the problem is that I've been to local breweries in Texas. I've been to local breweries in Los Angeles. I've been to local breweries in Alaska. All these places look the same. And the beer, by and large, tastes the same. And I don't like it. Like, I would rather go to a dive bar.
Right.
But that's me.
Yeah. Well,
it's the other thing. It's like I appreciate the craft. I appreciate the desire to make something like unique and authentic, but a lot of it winds up being the same.
Yeah. There's this quote from a winemaker, Serge Hochar of Chateau Moussard. It's a kind of a famous Lebanese winery, and I think it perfectly sums up the ethos of craft beer, natural wine, and a lot of spirits too. And he says, I would rather drink what is true than what is good.
Oh yeah.
And I think that itself presents a lot of weird conundrums, but I guess what it means for the craftsman is that it is more important to stay true to traditional methods or to the idea of historical sense of place for what you're making than to try and make it popular or even to try and make it tasty.
Yeah.
I might rather drink what's good.
I certainly would.
Because I think there's a lot of craft spirits people are getting into it. And they're like, yeah, we're doing this all the traditional way. And every batch is going to be a little different because that's how it was in the 1820s. And it's reflecting how we do this. And I'm thinking, somebody like Jack Daniels, somebody like Jim Beam, they've been making liquor for 120, 150 years. They figured some shit out along the way. Dude in the Carhartts and the neck tattoos, you've been making craft spirits for a year and a half. You don't know what you're doing. but
Yeah.
you have this claim towards authenticity and true, but it doesn't mean the stuff that you're making is any good. A lot of people are really down on stuff that's coming from MGP, which is an Indiana distiller, which makes rye, and it's bottled as all sorts of probably 200 different labels out there, independent craft bottlers who are buying MGP juice and bottling it. But you know what? MGP juice is great. I would drink that most times over a lot of craft ryes that are really immature and they've got this like mapo taste to them. They did that. Yeast was wrong. They just haven't figured it out. MGP, they figured it out. I'll drink that.
Yeah. And the MGP thing is so hilarious to me because
What is that? What is MGP?
I think it's Midwestern Grain Products. Yeah, it used to be owned by Seagram's.
So sorry, say that again. Say it again.
Midwestern Grain Products.
Okay.
It's an industrial distiller in Indiana, just across the river from Louisville, basically. And they've been making, Seagram started it. Seagram's was serious about they were making Canadian whiskey, but they were making rye, really, really, really good rye to blend into their Canadian whiskey. And so they developed this back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. They had a really good research lab. They had some great distillers who were really serious about what they did. They produced some great research papers, and then it sold twice since then. But the people that own it now have sort of respected the tradition, and they're making excellent rye. And a lot of people are buying it and bottling it, or they're buying it and aging it in, say, a sherry barrel, or they're buying it and they're aging it in Oregon to make some sort of a claim for it that it's just not a commodity product. And MGP has, I can't remember what it is, maybe 4 or 6 different mash bills, different formulas. So you can get sort of variations from there. You could blend those together. There's lots of stuff you can do with MGP, and MGP is all good. Like I said earlier, my only problem is when somebody tries to claim that it's their craft spirit. There's a one out in Iowa that was making
Templeton.
Templeton, and they got sued for it and settled because somebody.
I love how you knew it right away, Trevor.
Somebody in Chicago claimed that they were grievously injured by the fact that they thought it was a craft spirit and it wasn't. He also sued Tito's because Tito's says on the label handcrafted. Tito's is selling more vodka than just about anybody these days. It's not handcrafted. And so he sued for that, and the courts decided, you know what, that's just a fanciful statement. It can stand. This guy, yes. Anyway, Templeton settled. They were getting it from MGP, but they were talking about their story and how it was from their bootlegger grandfather, and it was his recipe and all this, that, and the other thing. And it was just, they're just buying MGP juice. So they had to come clean on it. A lot of people have come clean, but basically if you see it on a bottle of rye, if it says on the back, distilled in Indiana, it's from MGP.
Okay.
I noticed a couple bottles the other day. It was like distilled by so-and-so distillery in Indiana. No, it's MGP. You can create a shell company that claims that they're part of the distillery, but it's not.
Yeah. And then the challenge becomes trying to find the oldest, cheapest MGP.
Yeah, that's all.
I wanted to say one more thing about Bacardi, because I think it leads towards what the future of rum might be, even beyond craft. And that is, I recently, like within the last year, learned that Bacardi is no longer the number one selling rum in the world. It's Tanduay.
Right, from the Philippines.
Yeah, and by quite a healthy margin too.
Oh yeah, and I think there's another rum from China that's ahead of Bacardi, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there might be
on our radar because we can't get them. Oh yeah, I think you can't get them away now, but.
Well, yeah, Tanduay's here, but yeah, it's not that interesting. I mean, I haven't had their higher marks, but I've tried their basic line. It tasted like they were definitely doing something to it as far as flavorings. Probably. But yeah, and also India has a few. The whiskey distiller, I think it's Armud or something like that. It's like a single malt whiskey producer. They're making a rum now that's like one of the world's best selling rums. Yeah, so perhaps rum is globalizing.
Yeah, I think it's always been globalized, but now the trade is globalizing. It's always been made everywhere. Like I said, everywhere there's sugar, there's rum. China, India, Australia, Philippines, Mexico. And now it's
Oh, yeah.
the trade is starting to pick up. People are more interested. I mean, there's a lot more entrepreneurs slash adventurers who are going out looking for the stuff that we don't know and then setting up import agreements because they know there's this thirst among drinkers to try something that their friends and neighbors haven't yet tried. Everybody's looking for something new. And so if you can bring something new in, you got a product.
Yeah. So as we kind of like wind down, we're almost on 2 hours here, and I don't want to take much more of your time, Wayne. For what's up?
I got to start drinking. You can't hold me up here for too long.
Based. That's based. Cheers, sir. And so the I just got a couple of questions. Is there a rum that you think people should be drinking that is maybe affordable for for our economic climate? Like what do you recommend for
what do you
the
mean?
average?
Bang for your buck.
Yeah, bang
Yeah,
for
the-
your
the-
buck.
What do you mean by
The best rum for the working stiff.
Yeah.
For a basic rum? I'm big on the El Dorado line, El Dorado 3, El Dorado 5, which are all I think under $30. They make a really great. The El Dorado 5 makes a great rum old fashioned. The El Dorado 3 would be great in a daiquiri if you like a little bit of that's our oak to it. Yeah, I'm big on the El Dorado line as far as a budget line goes. If you want to get something fancier, look for any of the Foursquare limited releases. I think are really great. So yeah.
Sorry, so Foursquare, you said?
Foursquare, yeah, they have they release special releases every year. So whatever you see, just get it because it's probably going to be good.
And Rivers as well, right?
If you can get Rivers is great. Where that's very that's sort of rare and scarce. Appleton's solid rum. There's if you want something funky, the rum that's becoming much more accessible is a Mexican rum from southern Mexico, from the Oaxaca, or I think it's a few hours outside of Oaxaca, called Paranubes rum. It's funky and great. If you want to experiment more with agricole rums, the sugarcane rums, make a tiponche. Look for any of the JM rums would make a good one, or the Nissan White is really, really good. That's a little bit harder to find, but those are really good as well.
And so there's the rum, and are you working on another book? Hopefully.
I'm thinking about another book, but I'm not technically working on one.
What are you thinking? What are you thinking? Where do you want to go?
I can't talk about it yet.
No. Okay. Well.
Keep it under wraps.
Okay. I like it. I like it.
NDA with myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I respect that. Keep it under wraps until you got it going. I can't wait for whatever you come up with, because this is the book, and a bottle of rum, a history of the New World, and 10 cocktails. And I hope that you read this book, because it is, if you're a history buff, if you have even just a casual interest in booze, Wayne is such a great writer, and I would say historian. I mean, mostly like I learned a lot. I like this author, Tom Holland. Do you know Tom Holland?
I do not.
Tom Holland, mostly like he writes about a lot of, he wrote a book called, I guess, Rubicon, which is the history of Christianity and its cultural influence. He wrote, that's not Rubicon. That's Dominion. Dominion is about Christianity, but Rubicon is his probably most famous book about the end of the Roman Republic and into the Roman Empire. Is a transition into the Roman Empire. Your writing reminds me of his in terms of it's so like every page, every chapter, you're just getting so much information, and you're learning a lot. And it's to me, as someone who, not like Trevor or you and Wolfman, I don't know your academic credentials, but I quit school when I was 16. They're basically like, if you don't quit school, you're just going to be here till you're like 25. So I've always been sort of didactic in that sense of learning on my own. And your writing is to a person like me is very beneficial and
Thank you. Appreciate it.
and very entertaining as well.
Yeah, I particularly got a kick out of your distaste for historical reenactment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
that
freaks me
was
out. It freaks me out. I see somebody in a green coat and a three-cornered hat coming at me. I go the other way.
I laughed out loud reading that.
yeah.
Usually at the end of the show, we kind of give a send off. If there's anything you'd like to project or send out there, Wayne, this is
Only
your
thing I've got to say is drink more rum. Experiment, check it out. It's a whole world. If you're not a rum drinker, or if you had a bad experience with rum in high school and it ended up in your neighbor's shrubberies, forget that. You got to move on. And there's a whole world out there for you to explore. So go explore it.
Okay. And Wolfman, what you got anything for us?
Nah, man, I would just say to anyone listening, drink more rum and check out this book. There's a lot of interesting history and anecdotes along the way, and it's not like reading a textbook about alcohol. It's a fun ride, and you should check it out, and it will make you want to drink, and I support that. So yeah, everybody get out there, check out the book, and yeah, thank you, Wayne, for coming on.
My pleasure.
And Mr. Beveridge, what do you have to say for yourself?
Yeah, I just like to slip another endorsement of the book in there. I found it completely compelling and interesting, both as a lover of history and a lover of booze. And I think if you're either, you will get an equal kick out of it. You will learn more about the other. And what it does that I think is really difficult in books like this is it indulges the inner geek of someone who thinks they know a lot about rum and still teaches them a lot without insulting them. And it seems very readable for someone who knows very little about rum too. And it's that perfect entertainment, educational experience. 10 out of 10. One of my favorite booze books ever, and I read a lot of them. So
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
So thank you. I'm sitting here in the dark, but I'm blushing.
I love it. I love it. It's natural, baby. I love it. Keep doing it. This book is, like you were saying, Trevor, this book to me and to the audience out there, like if you're afraid of getting into the weeds of like what booze is, how it's made, all this stuff like this, like no, this book is extremely readable, and every chapter is just it just gives you this endorphin rush of learning new things. And I hope that you read it. And please follow Mr. Wayne Curtis wherever he's on Twitter. You can find him there as well. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I like talking about rum, and I find it's even more fun when there's people listening to me.
Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
All right. You
Thank
guys
you.
have a good night.
You
You
too.
too.
Bye.
Bye.